Good afternoon. Thank you for joining Read Tech for our today's webinar, Complying with MoCRA, New FDA Cosmetics Regulations. My name is Erin McDermott, and I'm going to be your moderator for today's webinar. And we have with us today subject matter experts, Caitlin Lynes, who is a strategic account manager for our pharma team here at Read Tech, and also Shelly Garg, who is the president and founder of Garg Law. And when we send these slides out later today, you'll be able to see their bios in the appendix. As far as logistics for today's webinar, during the meeting, it is being recorded. If you have any questions, please submit them through the chat box. If we have some time to answer questions today, we will, but if not, we will certainly follow up with each of you individually to answer your questions. And as I just stated, we will be sending the slides and the link to the recording out to all registrants via email, either later today or this week. So we're excited to discuss MoCRA with you all today. We knew this is a brand new regulation, so we're going to go through a MoCRA overview, get into some compliance requirements and exemptions, compliance preparation, expected regulatory implementation, and some support that's available for MoCRA. We do know that this webinar was originally scheduled for 30 minutes, but as more and more details came out surrounding MoCRA, we think we might go slightly over the time, so we appreciate everyone for bearing with us. And if you have to leave early, we will send the recording out. Okay, so we wanted to kick things off today with a poll so we can sort of get a feel for the audience that we're dealing with and, adjust our talk track accordingly. So if you could all take a minute and just answer this poll question that's appearing on your screen about how many cosmetic products does your company have? And you'll see the options right there on your screen. We'll give it another 15 seconds or so. Okay, it does look like most everyone has voted. So I'm going to go ahead and close this poll. And we'll quickly share the results. It looks like we have a pretty good mix, between 21 and 14% for all buckets. So we'll definitely make sure that we're addressing, large and small companies. So with that, Caitlin, I will hand the presentation off to you and let you get started with our MoCRA overview.
Great, thank you so much, Erin. Great, so thank you everyone for joining today. Obviously we will be going over MoCRA. And MoCRA is the most significant expansion to regulate cosmetic products since 1938. This new requirement will help ensure the safety of cosmetic products that are being used by consumers every day. Just a bit of history. There was the Voluntary Cosmetic Registration Program. You'll also see it use the acronym VCRP, which was started in 1972. And this was a paper-based mail-in submission to FDA. FDA has stopped accepting and processing both electronic and paper submissions of the Voluntary Registration Program for cosmetic establishments and products on March 27, 2023. FDA is now developing this program for the submission of facility registrations and product listings mandated by MoCRA, and will provide further updates on its availability. The prior VCRP submissions will not be transferred to this new portal for MoCRA, so please keep that in mind. And I will pass it over to Shelly.
Thanks, Caitlin. So good to talk with you all this afternoon. We really appreciate you joining. So I just wanted to touch on the definition of cosmetics and the products that are covered under this new regulation. At our firm, we've received some questions about whether certain products are covered under the regulatory framework, including pet grooming products. So I'd just like to clarify, most of you know, FDA defines cosmetics by their intended use. And you see these definitions here: preparations of cosmetic ingredients, with a qualitatively and quantitatively set composition for use in a finished product. And here the intended use statement: articles intended to be rubbed, poured, sprinkled, or sprayed on, introduced into, or otherwise applied to the human body for cleansing, beautifying, promoting attractiveness, or altering the appearance. So this does not apply to pet grooming products, over-the-counter drug products that may have cosmetic ingredients as inactive, are, from an ingredient declaration perspective, still regulated under the cosmetic framework, but for all intents and purposes, this is for cosmetics and personal care products, which include, makeup, skincare, deodorants, shaving creams, and perfumes. So just to give us an idea of the kinds of products we're talking about that have coverage under MoCRA.
Great. And during today's webinar, we will go over the FDA's draft guidance for the registration and listing of cosmetic facilities and products. We're specifically going to highlight the definitions of all this lingo that you may or may not be familiar with, who's responsible, what information is required, and how to submit and when. I do want to reiterate that this information is based on the draft guidance from FDA. They have not yet released the final guidance to industry, but we are expecting that will be released any day now, and we'll have more information then. So we'll jump into, specifics about who is covered under MoCRA. And you probably have heard this term and new buzzword, in reviewing the regulation. But FDA is using this term called responsible person. And this relates to a manufacturer, packer, or distributor of a cosmetic product. But the key is that that entity is listed and their name appears on the cosmetic product label itself. There are small business exemptions, which are defined by average gross sales in the U.S. for the preceding 3 years, being less than 1 million, and also for companies who don't engage in processing or manufacturing of certain items, which I know it's on a later slide, but just to give us kind of general framework for what we're talking about here. Exemptions include companies that are producing products that regularly come into contact with the mucous membrane of the eye under conditions of use that are customary or usual, cosmetic products that are injected, cosmetic products that are intended for internal use, and cosmetic products that are intended to alter the appearance for more than 24 hours. So small businesses minus these exceptions are exempt from facility registration and product listing. So I'm sure, as Caitlin will talk further, we do encourage companies now to understand their operations, current labeling responsibilities outlined by private agreements, and the relationship between the supply chain parties in terms of who is on the label itself or who wishes to be on the label. And then also looking at your operations to see if there are any exemptions that you could take advantage of. Even though there may be a regulatory exemption, you may also want to consider whether customers and purchasers do require compliance and require this registration and listing. But just as a place to start in evaluating your registration obligations under MoCRA. Great, so I'm going to go over the cosmetic registration notice. A pilot program for the cosmetic facility registrations and product listing submissions was created to test the various forms of submission of this content. August of this year was the pilot program deadline, and they had 9 participants in this. The testing of this program began on September 15th, and it will conclude at the end of this week. Cosmetic Direct is FDA's electronic submission portal where users can manually populate a web form or upload the converted SPL file to the system to go to FDA. The testing phase has also reviewed the submission of the paper forms, but as I'm sure we'll state several times throughout this webinar, FDA has stated that in their draft guidance that they highly encourage the use of electronic submissions. Great, so I'm going to go over the requirements and exemptions, which Shelly did briefly touch upon. So really, who has to comply with this? And to put it simply, any facility that is manufacturing or processing a cosmetic product that will be sold in the United States will need to comply. As a manufacturer, packager, or distributor of a cosmetic product, if your company name is identified on the product label, you must comply. Now, like Shelly had mentioned, there are exemptions. Specifically, small businesses are excluded. So if a company is averaging the gross annual sales income for your cosmetic products in the past 3 years, and that's less than 1 million, and your company is not involved in the manufacturing of the product, you would not have to comply. There are also certain types of products that are excluded, which we touched upon. So anything that would come in contact in the with the mucous membrane of your eye, anything injected or intended for internal use, or even products that are intended to alter your appearance for more than 24 hours, those would not fall under this requirement and would not need to comply. Now, to specify the types of facilities that are excluded from this regulation, specifically would be any sort of retail locations such as beauty shops or salons, cosmetic product retailers, pharmacies, hospitals, doctors' offices, and any public health agency. They are not considered facilities that are manufacturing product, so they would not need to comply. Other entities that would be excluded from submitting a cosmetic facility registration would include a trade show or any other venue where you could possibly be providing cosmetic product samples. So if you're going to a trade show anytime soon and you plan to give out samples of your product, do not worry, that trade show does not need to be a registered facility. And if a facility is manufacturing a cosmetic product solely for research purposes and is not being distributed to consumers, they would not have to comply with the facility registration. Other entities that would be excluded from submitting a cosmetic facility registration. Oh, you know what? Sorry, I am on a different slide here. When you're reviewing your product portfolio, you may be overwhelmed by the number of cosmetic products your organization may have. I do want to say to keep in mind, if a product comes in multiple shades, flavors, scents, or even has multiple packaging sizes, they can all be contained in one product listing as long as they all include the same formulation. And we will get into that a little bit later on when we discuss the data that's required for the registration of the product. All product listings will also be assigned a product listing number. And if you're familiar with the drug listing process, this would be comparable to an NDC number.
And Caitlin, before we get into this next section, because we've been getting these questions as well, if there's a question as to whether your operations are subject to MoCRA or whether there is an exemption that could apply, we recommend that you either internally review your operations and have a letter to file documenting your exemption if there is kind of a gray area or question mark, or if you squarely fall into the requirement that you must register and list, that you do so. But if there's just any kind of gray area about your compliance obligations in terms of registration, having a letter to file just to make sure you kind of documented your diligence. If there were ever to be an FDA question or an inspection or anything of that kind, is always advisable.
Great. It looks like we're jumping into a few poll questions now.
Yep, thank you, Caitlin. So I'm going to launch the next poll question, if everyone could just take a moment and answer. This one, actually, you can select more than one answer, so please do select all that apply. What operations does your facility conduct? Manufacturing, packaging, relabeling, and distributing. So again, we'll give this another 10 or 15 seconds so everyone has a chance to answer, and we can make sure that our discussion is informed for our audience. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and close this poll, and thank you to everyone who has voted, and I'm going to quickly share the results. Again, this one, it allows multiple answers, so our total's well over 100%, but it looks like about 77% of the attendees are manufacturing, 50% do packing, 33% do relabeling, and 65% distributing. So with that, I think we'll jump right into poll question number 3. And if you could all just let us know, are your operations currently compliant with MoCRA? So yes, no, not sure, or we need help. So again, give a couple seconds here. This one's pretty easy, so it shouldn't take too long. Okay. All right, and I'm going to close this poll now, and we can quickly share the results here. It looks like the majority is not quite sure. So Shelly, maybe we can jump into this next compliance preparation section, and you can help us understand and get a little bit better clarity on what's required from MoCRA.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Erin. So we'll talk in the next couple of slides about the other obligations that MoCRA imposes on cosmetic companies and responsible persons. One of the most fundamental newer requirements is the requirement to collect and report adverse events and have record keeping. So under the new regulations, FDA imposes greater record keeping obligations on product safety and reporting, documentation, and then follow-up on serious adverse events, and has now an expanded definition of what constitutes an adverse event, a serious adverse event. And there are also new labeling requirements, including providing contact information for adverse event reporting and notifications for products intended for professional use. So here, this slide talks about the definition of an adverse event. All companies are required to report a serious adverse event associated with the use of cosmetic products in the U.S. within 15 business days after receiving the report. A serious adverse event is one that results in a life-threatening experience, inpatient hospitalization, a persistent or significant disability or incapacity, an infection, something, of course, that can provide serious adverse health consequences or death, so something life-threatening. There are record-keeping obligations, which are new. But actually, before I get to that, I want to just add that the adverse event report, once you submit to FDA, it must include a copy of the cosmetic label, and the responsible person is required to report any material updates that person learns about related to the adverse event for 1 year following submission of the report. So you can see that there is a greater emphasis on collection, documentation, and reporting of adverse events, and serious adverse events to the FDA. FDA also has the authority to request information relating to flavor or fragrance ingredients if it has reasonable grounds to believe that the ingredients caused or contributed to the adverse event. So we recommend now, organizing the data, including procedures for intaking, reviewing, and processing an adverse event. And this is typical of companies who have GMP systems in place or quality systems in place. They're familiar with that type of, SOP development. But in order to comply with MoCRA, one of these critical areas is adverse event reporting and record keeping. And so having a system to develop, the process for intaking, reviewing, an adverse or serious adverse event, and then processing that, which means determining whether it's a reportable event to FDA, is very critical. Now, in terms of record keeping, businesses are required to maintain records of any health-related adverse event associated with the use of cosmetic products for 6 years. And then for small businesses, it's 3 years if you're not engaged in manufacturing certain products, which we've outlined before. So, I just want to reiterate, it's both an adverse event collection and reporting, and then also a record-keeping function. Caitlin, could you please advance to the next slide? So in terms of how FDA would use, is intending to use the records, the Federal Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act has been amended to provide that FDA inspections of facilities that manufacture or process cosmetic products now extends to certain records and information, which include adverse event report information. So they have the ability to request these records during a cosmetic inspection. And you can see kind of how this is all tied in, but by registering and listing a cosmetic facility with FDA, you are consenting to an FDA inspection. And so this is all, again, critical information to have in place and to develop the documentation if it currently does not exist. So in terms of records access, if FDA has a reasonable belief, and that term itself is loaded with a lot of legal analysis, but if there is a reasonable belief that a cosmetic product, including an ingredient in a cosmetic product, is likely to be adulterated. You can see a lot of open-ended language, such that the use or exposure to the product presents a threat of serious adverse health consequences or death to humans, then FDA can access and copy certain records related to the cosmetic product, including safety records. So again, FDA has now the ability to request, copy, obtain the records during an inspection, which is a newer authority provided under the regulations. So we'll switch now to good manufacturing practice requirements. Over the years, you likely have seen FDA has advised there is a voluntary GMP system in place for cosmetic manufacturing and distribution. But what is really interesting, and I think kind of long awaited by industry, is the requirement now to have mandatory GMPs for cosmetic facilities. And so MoCRA provides FDA new inspection authorities and other requirements related to the responsible person. But with all product categories, FDA's inspection philosophy does really remain very same, for cosmetics. It is to confirm compliance with the CGMP requirements, to ensure product quality, and to really mitigate issues that would trigger public health risk or patient harm. At the end of the day, FDA's mission is public health and safety. And so all of these rules, these new authorities are with that in mind, And so FDA has the ability to conduct these inspections. They could either do a routine surveillance inspection, which is more GMP related, or a for cause inspection. And FDA is also slated to develop regulations to establish and require standardized testing methods for detecting and identifying asbestos and talc-containing cosmetic products. So the proposed rule for GMPs is expected to issue 1 year after, 2 years rather, after the passage of MoCRA, so December 29th, 2024, with the final rule expected December 29th, 2025. FDA did hold a workshop earlier this summer on June 1st to talk to industry about whether there should be small business exemptions or modified GMP requirements for small businesses, and many in the industry called for uniformity among all manufacturers regardless of company size. So we will continue to monitor FDA's guidance on small business exemptions and any flexibility in the final rule as guidance issues. But what I get asked, all the time is, well, what do we do now? This is not final, so how do we prepare? What do we need to ensure we have in place? And as we all know, inspections are on the rise. FDA, since the end of the pandemic, has really increased inspections across all categories. I've seen a tremendous uptick over the last 2 years. But GMP compliance is not an overnight task. And so we recommend that cosmetic facilities understand several of the options that FDA has advised will help guide the finalization of the cosmetic GMP rule. That includes the U.S. voluntary cosmetic GMPs that were published in 2013, the ISO standard, which is ISO 22716, and then the NSF ANSI standard 455 on GMPs for cosmetics. So those three programs are helping guide FDA to kind of align, international and domestic standards and have some consistency. And so we've been advising the companies that we've been working with, and our clients to do kind of like a health check. Where is your GMP system? Are you starting from zero? Are you kind of midway? Are you very, very compliant? And have a mock audit or a desktop audit, and then conduct a gap assessment to see what's missing. You don't want to wait until next year when the rule becomes final, because more often than not, FDA's advice on how it's going to, use its current systems and these international standards to direct the final development of the rule is really indicative of what the rule will look like. So if there's some small tweaks that can be made, as the rule becomes final, but we don't recommend waiting until that time, because there could be potentially a lot of work to do, and these other programs like adverse event reporting, et cetera, are really important to develop a process now. Okay, so in terms of labeling and safety substantiation, the new regulations require cosmetic products to cosmetic product labels to include certain contact information through which the responsible person can receive adverse event reports. So this is similar to how OTC drugs are regulated with respect to labeling. So the responsible person that's physically noted on a cosmetic product label is the party that should be able to receive adverse event reports. So, you want to make sure that that person is selected carefully and knows their obligations. The contact info must include a domestic address, phone number, or electronic contact information, which can include a website. But the key, again, is that that person is reachable. And then we have this other piece here where, FDA is now mandating adequate substantiation, and that it be in an organized system. So responsible persons are now required to ensure and maintain records supporting adequate product substantiation of all cosmetic products by December 29th. So we're only, about 3 months away, almost to the day. Today is September 27th. What this requires is that the responsible person show that a cosmetic product is safe to be marketed in the U.S. and meets established safety standards to avoid being considered adulterated, which just means in layman's term that it's prohibited from U.S. entry or sale. Just to be clear, this applies to all cosmetic products and should be in place before December 29th. But what's interesting is, FDA provides this rule, but then has not provided guidance as to, what it actually needs to look like. So what we interpret this to mean, based on FTC and FDA, regulation, is that a product needs to have, or a company rather, needs to develop product to develop product safety is to have a certified safety assessment. And so other countries require this before placing a product on the market, having a complete product file, a certified safety assessment. But short of that, there are other mechanisms to help substantiate safety. That includes cosmetic ingredient reports, CIR reports, as long as you are in the safe as use category with recommended use levels. There are also EU Scientific Committee on Consumer Safety opinions that can be utilized, raw material specs, SDS and safety data information, and then of course having any actual testing that's required for the product. So things like consumer and use tests to support claims, HRIPT sensitization testing, and then any microbiological testing that's required, again, based on the product composition and the claims you're making. So what's key though, and we kind of find is provided by FDA, but is sort of kind of like a read between the lines is that businesses must have this information not only available, but they must have it in an organized fashion, not just on file. So the responsible person is actually tasked now for reviewing the data, maintaining the data, and then acting if there's if there's any questionable information. So again, we recommend now having a plan in place to develop a safety assessment and maintain records. Again, conducting a gap analysis of your records and your cosmetic products and SKUs to see what you need, and then arranging and conducting testing. Now, if testing is required, it can take 6 to 8 weeks or more to complete. So it's important to work with testing labs and have this in place. Then to receive and assess test results, develop a record-keeping system, and maintain records. So, I know this seems like a lot of information for companies who may be starting kind of, more ground zero. But if you have some system in place or working to develop this, in my experience, FDA wants to see that you're making strides towards getting these programs in place. Not that you need to have an A+, but certainly that that it's something kind of in the works and is something you're focused on, in developing. And then I think the last sort of substantive area here is FDA's new mandatory recall authority. So this is new. Prior to this, FDA had a voluntary, it was a voluntary program. So FDA now has the ability to mandate a recall. They must determine that there is a reasonable probability, again, that's subject to legal analysis, that a cosmetic is adulterated or misbranded and presents serious adverse health consequences or death to humans. Before issuing an order, a mandatory recall order, the FDA must provide the responsible person with an informal hearing and an opportunity to voluntarily cease distribution. But now what's just different is that they do have the ability to mandate it. In addition, MoCRA provides specific consumer notification requirements for recalled products, including specific information for press releases and recall execution. So if you don't have a recall plan in place, we recommend that be part of your, your work in getting into compliance with MoCRA. It's part of your GMP and quality systems compliance. And then having mock recalls, mock recall notices, customer notices kind of at the ready, developing that language. Recall situations can be very stressful for any of those who have been through, that process. But the goal is to, quickly, efficiently, and accurately identify and minimize the scope of the recall, execute the recall efficiently with FDA, provide the customer notifications that are required and move on, right? Get back into business, and to minimize reputation damage to a business and product delays, et cetera. So kind of doing some of this proactive compliance and maintenance at the front end can save dollars significantly, and time and stress and disruption to the business. So we strongly recommend, a little goes a long way with a lot of these programs and getting them into place.
Great. Thank you, Shelly, for all of that.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you, Shelly. I'm just going to take a few minutes here to go into a bit more in depth of structured product labeling, which you may see abbreviated as SPL. And if you're new to this world, I'll give you a brief synopsis of what this is. So SPL is an XML document standard, which is approved by Health Level 7 and was then adopted by FDA in 2005 as a mechanism for exchanging medical product information, including drug and cosmetic establishment registration and product listings. And ReadTech has been performing SPL services for industry since FDA made this requirement back in 2005. The SPL file, which would be submitted to FDA, has to follow the FDA's implementation guide. It will include controlled vocabulary and follow their style sheet for when the XML is rendered into the legible format. If you look at an unrendered XML file, it will look like a bunch of letters and numbers jumbled together, but you will have to render that XML to see the legible view. The SPL for FDA, it also follows Health Level 7 standards and SPL schema. So there are requirements for these SPL files in order to be properly submitted to FDA. And at this point, you might be just asking yourself, how can you do this? How can you make the submission? And you do have options. You can mail in a paper submission, but keep in mind that FDA is strongly recommending for this to be done electronically, and that electronic option is via SPL. So you can do this SPL requirement using Cosmetic Direct web form. This site is not yet open to the public, but we are hearing that it will be available in October. Your organization also has the option to build or buy their own SPL tool in-house. Or lastly, you can contact a vendor such as ReadTech, and you could utilize our SPL conversion and submission services. If you were to utilize ReadTech to create these SPL files on your behalf, what I'm sharing on my screen here is a draft version of our data collection form. Specifically, this one would be for the facility registration. And if you're familiar with the FDA's drug facility registration form, if you've ever done that with ReadTech, this will look very familiar to you. The one key difference here for this facility registration is that you're required to identify each brand name of a cosmetic product that your site is manufacturing. In a traditional drug listing, you have to identify each site rather than each brand. And just to give you an overview of the data elements that are required for the facility registration, it is made up of over 25 data elements, which would include the facility identifiers, the owner or operator. If you're manufacturing a product outside of the US, you would have to identify a US agent. You'd be providing the submitter info and an authorized agent, as well as those brand names that I just mentioned. And there would also be a contact person that would be the point of contact for FDA if they were to contact you for an audit. The two things that you most definitely should have identified before starting this process is confirming that your company has an FDA FEI number, which is a FDA Establishment Identifier number. This can be identified using the FEI search portal, which is linked on these slides, which you'll receive after the webinar. And then I also want to point out, you should also confirm that your site has a DUNS number assigned to you by Dun & Bradstreet. If you are unsure if this has been assigned to your organization yet, you can use the link on this slide to confirm. And now on my screen here, I do have a draft version of what ReadTech's cosmetic product registration form would look like. And again, if you've done drug listings with us, this will look very similar. The product listing SPL has over 35 required data elements, such as the responsible person, submitter information, product identifiers, all of the ingredients that are in the product, and the establishments that are manufacturing the product. A data element may cause a challenge, that may cause a challenge is the unique ingredient identifier or the Unicode. Each ingredient that you identify in your product listing will need an associated Unicode. And this could cause challenges for companies that have products with 30 plus ingredients, because that's a long list to go through. And what you can do is use the link on this slide here to go to the UniSearch portal to identify if there is already an assigned Unicode for your ingredients. In the case where you have an ingredient that there is no Unicode assigned to, you can simply email FDA with this email address on the screen and provide them with the name of your ingredient, and they will assign a Unicode. And typically their turnaround time on the Unicode assignment is just a few days. You will need to wait until the Unicode is posted publicly on their portal to then submit this file. Because if you submit the file prior to the Unicode being posted, it will not pass validation. Great, it looks like we have one more poll question.
Two more.
Oh, two more. Sorry.
But no, that's okay. But we are nearing the end, I promise. But for now, we would like to know how you plan to support cosmetic registration and listing to the FDA. So we'll give, a few seconds again for everyone to complete this. Caitlin just went through the options, but you can manually enter data and mail paper forms, manually enter data into Cosmetics Direct website, build or buy SPL tool for e-submissions, read tech SPL e-submission services, or another third-party SPL e-submission services. So I'll give it just a few more seconds. Yeah, we can go ahead and close out this poll and share the results. So it looks like we do have the majority of the people either manually entering data directly to the Cosmetic Direct website or utilizing ReadTech SPL e-submission services.
Great.
So with that, I will hand this back over to you, Caitlin and Shelly, and we can talk about the expected regulatory implementation.
Great, thank you. Great, so I have a timeline on my screen here. I'm going to focus on two specific dates. First being October of this year for the Cosmetic Direct portal to open. So like I mentioned earlier, we are anticipating that the Direct portal will launch later in October. This will be FDA's webpage, and this is based off of what was detailed in their draft guidance on the registration of cosmetic products. So like I said, we will anticipate mid-October, excuse me. And then December 29th of 2023 is the initial registration and listing deadline per the MoCRA enactment that was stated in the draft guidance. So those are the two dates that we really want to focus on right now. And then really just to go over the timing of compliance, focusing on the facility registrations first. The deadline to register is December 29th of this year. After this initial registration, you can make any updates 60 days after, but then there will be a biannual requirement to renew your registration of your facility. So after that initial registration, every 2 years, you will have to renew, even if you have had no changes to the registration status. And for the product compliance, the deadline is December 29th of this year. After the initial registration, 120 days after, if there are any changes, you can make those. But then annually, you will need to update the registration with any changes you have, or annually, if there have been no changes, you will simply notify FDA that no changes have been made to this product listing. And then Shelly, I'm going to pass it over to you for best practices.
Thanks, Caitlin. I appreciate it. So just to kind of cap off our session here, the next two slides just kind of talk about, top tips to start getting really ready. I failed to kind of put one at the top here, which is, I recommend that you review your company operations and determine fundamentally, are you subject to MoCRA? Are there any exemptions that apply to your operations? Drafting and documenting a letter to file if there are any exemptions, and kind of just giving a regulatory roadmap for all of the items that need to get into compliance. That helps just organizationally, kind of check the boxes, make sure that things are, that you know what you need to comply with before you kind of dive in. Thereafter, it's reviewing internal procedures, developing processes for receiving and reporting adverse events, which we talked about, and then labeling and substantiation compliance with the required substantiation file, and having recall procedures in place given FDA's new mandatory recall authorities. Also, of course, it's overall GMP compliance. We talked about the different international and domestic standards that FDA will be utilizing in the guidance of the development of its final rule. So, having that kind of as a backdrop as you look at GMP compliance is important. And really an on-site or desktop audit is key to identifying what gaps exist and then bridging those gaps with a CAPA, and overall compliance. In terms of product safety, we also recommend reviewing all product composition, safety, and toxicity claims to ensure that they are scientifically supported and defensible, including any third-party certifications or test methods that are used to support such claims, and having that information available in a complete and organized fashion to provide FDA, during an inspection or any other records request. In terms of other items to really consider, in terms of safety, again, documenting consumer surveys and other data regarding product safety and test methods used to substantiate product safety, providing clear and consistent guidance to influencers about what they can and cannot say about products on social media. Both FTC and FDA have guides on, influencer testimonials, navigating social media, which party controls kind of which, the website and testimonies, and how claims can be tied to the company, even if that claim was not directly made. So it's important to have your hands around what those regulations are. Identifying and collecting information for registration and listing, which Caitlin did a really nice job discussing, and then having agreements in place. I think too often we see that companies, have handshake deals with a lot of supply chain partners, and then things go south, and then there are, questions about liability, responsibilities, indemnification, et cetera. So really having agreements in place between the supply chain parties is really important to identify up front, what those responsibilities will be like. And in terms of our role, we are a regulatory firm and assist companies through the life cycle of products across all categories: cosmetics, homeopathic products, med devices, OTC drugs, foods, beverages, and supplements. And our goal is to assist with legal launch of products. So anything relating to product development, what are my obligations? Am I subject? Am I exempt? Product labeling compliance, substantiation, GMPs, all of that to really get your compliance work in check. And then post-launch compliance, like serious adverse event reporting, new SKUs that are developing and how kind of that can be added to the current portfolio. In addition to any enforcement. So if there's FDA inspections, 483s, warning letters, FDA recall, voluntary or mandated, import alert removals, import detentions, if the product or any component of the product is imported, we'll get involved. Our goal is to be, a U.S. FDA regulatory partner as questions arise. We're here as little or as much as you need us, but just in the event you have questions, to serve as outside counsel to your company. So I'm happy to address any questions at the end of this webinar, and feel free to, I think my contact information should be provided. If you have any questions, feel free to send me an email, and I really appreciate your participation this afternoon, and to ReTech as well. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Shelly. I'm going to give a brief overview of ReTech's services for the cosmetic registration and listings. So this image here shows our workflow process to provide you the delivered SPL file. So here you'll see the drug product manufacturer. In this case, it will be the cosmetic product manufacturer. We would have you provide us the populated data collection forms and associated data that's required. And we would take that information and convert it into the SPL format on your behalf. Keep in mind that this service is pending FDA's SPL technical implementation document. Once that is finally provided, we will be up and running to be providing this service to you. So once we have developed that SPL file, we would return it back to the cosmetic company. And at that point, you would either opt for ReTech to make the submission on your behalf to FDA, or if you prefer, you can take that SPL file and make your own submission. Either way works fine for us. It's really your preference on how you'd like to make that submission. And just to give you some benefits of the experience of working with ReadTech, we help industry comply with these new regulations. We understand that sometimes, especially at the end of the year, is a very busy time and organizations tend to have limited resources. And that's where ReadTech can come in and help. We help create a harmonious scenario between our organization and yours to meet this critical deadline and to help you be more efficient by meeting this. We utilize a secure environment to create the SPL information, and it is housed and centrally located. We utilize version control and an audit trail. So we have all current and historical versions of your documentation. And this will really streamline workflow by improving communication between ourselves and you, the client, and then your submissions to FDA as well. And anytime you place an order, everything can be tracked and placed right with our SPL development team. And if at any point you have any questions about how you can work with ReadTech, please reach out to myself directly or anyone else on the ReadTech Pharma team. At the end of this presentation, you will be provided with our information. And then this is just a quick little commercial. If this does apply to you, the US FDA announced that there will be a change to OTC monograph drugs and how they will be, their monograph will be identified in drug listings. So there will be a change to marketing category and the application number for OTC monograph drugs. If this is something that you will have to update at the end of this year, please reach out to ReadTech and please keep an eye out for content that we'll be sending out to our clients. I believe we will be hosting a webinar in a few weeks focusing on end of year reporting, and this will definitely be included in that webinar as well. So definitely register for our next webinar. And we do have our final poll question, which I'll pass it over to Erin.
Thanks, Caitlin. So in the vein of what Caitlin was just describing, we kind of want to get a feel while we're preparing our next webinar. So we're hoping you guys could take just a quick minute and answer for us. How do you plan to update OTC product monograph listings? So we'll give it just a few seconds. Hopefully this does apply to a lot of you. We thought that there certainly would be a lot of crossover between the MoCRA audience and the OTC product monograph audience. So I am going to go ahead and close the poll right now. Thank you to everyone who voted. And it looks like overwhelmingly ReadTech. So that's what we like to see. And with that, Caitlin, if you could just jump onto the next slide. As Shelly mentioned, if you have any questions for Shelly Garg, please take note of her contact information. As we've mentioned several times, you will be getting a copy of the slides, so her contact information will be in there. And then any questions for ReadTech, for Caitlin or ReadTech in general, you can reach us at pharma@readtech.com. Again, the contact information will be in the follow-up email that we will be sending out. So with that, we thank everyone for attending today. We really appreciate your attention and your engagement, and we look forward to the next webinar. Thanks, Caitlin, and thanks, Shelly, for your participation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.